When we first entered the old lanes of the galaxy, we thought we had found history. We had crossed into the inner reaches from the black, thin outskirts where humanity had grown alone, and all at once there were signals layered over signals. Civilizations older than our oldest language families, relic stars wrapped in machine halos, archives built before Earth had cooled enough for rain. The maps were dense there, the traffic was dense. The sky itself seemed inhabited. For 3 generations, we had moved outward and inward from Sol in widening shells, building spin habitats in comets, hollowing dwarf planets, driving fusion arcs between dim red suns no older power had ever cared to claim. We had not known we were late. We had thought the galaxy mostly empty, because our end of it was mostly empty. Then our far scouts touched the fringe of a trade corridor, and the silence ended. The first species we met called itself, in our best translation, the Tesh Collective, though it was neither a species in the human sense nor a collective in any political one. A Tesh body was a drifting crown of cartilage loops and gas bladders around a wet neural core. Individual Tesh were temporary bloomings from a much larger distributed lineage memory. They spoke by pressure pulse, color wash, and magnetic hiss. What came through our translators was thin and inadequate, but the meaning was unmistakable. You are new, you are distant, you are noticed. At first they were almost courteous. They assigned observers. They explained navigation taboos, tribute lanes, sterilized regions, forbidden fabrication classes, acceptable export categories, acceptable armament ceilings. They described all of this not as negotiation but as weather, as one might explain tides to a shoreline animal. We listened. We smiled. We recorded everything. The old powers were not a senate or republic, or even an empire with a center. They were a predatory equilibrium among elder civilizations clustered around the thick, rich heart of the Milky Way, where stars were close and life had risen often. Over millions of years they had fought one another to exhaustion, then to arrangement. Not peace, arrangement. The strongest among them had learned that exterminating every rival was costly, but freezing everyone beneath them was efficient. So the galaxy was divided into kinds. There were the elder dominants, few and terrible, whose fleets policed the main corridors, and whose monopolies wrapped strategic technologies like strangler vines. There were the bound species, permitted to live within assigned volumes under hard limits of industry, fleet tonnage, and colonization. There were tributaries harvested for biology, metals, field harmonics, and labor. There were service species bred or sculpted long ago to fit logistical niches. There were dead species, remembered mainly as warnings. Every younger civilization was told the same thing in different forms. Grow to the approved size, remain useful, do not become dangerous. If you become dangerous, you will be reduced. Humanity's first formal reception took place inside a station, grown from fused bone around a neutron star relay. There the delegates of the hegemonic compact appraised us. One was a vor, if our xenobiologists used the right simplification. It stood on 6 hooked limbs and carried its cognition in braided organ clusters along its spine, each lit by traveling bioluminescent verdict patterns. It did not converse, it pronounced. Another was a shell of mirrored liquid around a lattice of vibrating dust, representing the calxate choir, a species that thought in phase alignments and considered speech an act of reducing reality into edible lies. The third was a machine frame inhabited by slivers of the rune ascendancy, predatory mycelial minds that inhabited host architectures and viewed selfhood as temporary weaponization. They were alien enough that no human instinct could truly read them, but cruelty translated cleanly. They congratulated us on surviving emergence in the barren periphery. They praised our adaptability. They informed us that our recognized territory would consist of 83 systems, all of them in regions we had already expanded far beyond. The rest of our settlements, resource chains, and unregistered habitats did not exist in law and would be dismantled or abandoned as compliance proceeded. Our delegation objected. We had human populations in more than 200 systems by then, most still light and scattered but growing. We offered surveys, charters, development plans. The Vor answered by extending a blade claw toward a hanging display. It lit with the image of a world ocean boiling under orbital fire. This species, our translators rendered, extended beyond ration. It was corrected. The calxate shell rippled silver. Containment preserves sequence. The rune frame added, your surprise indicates poor preparatory modeling. Remedy this. That was our first clear lesson. We were not being invited into civilization. We were being collared, so we bowed. That is what shocked them most in hindsight, not our anger, our obedience. We signed the limit accords. We agreed to inspections. We withdrew visible settlements from mapped systems beyond the imposed border. We censored our own public histories before releasing them into interstellar archives. In our official records, the time from steam power to orbital industry stretched longer than truth. The interval from digital computation to fusion torch ships lengthened by centuries. The leap from first permanent off-world habitats to extrasolar colonization became a slow, cautious drift. We made ourselves look promising but ordinary, clever but not alarming, emotional, divided. Fast by some provincial standard perhaps, yet safely within expectations. At the same time, every honest record went dark. The outer edge had always taught us concealment. Distance was our first ally. We had grown among poor stars, long supply lines, low traffic, and cold mathematics. We were used to redundancy because no one came if something broke. We were used to distributed industry because centralized dependence was suicide across light years. We were used to solving problems without asking permission because there was no one to ask. The elder species looked toward the crowded center, where threats historically arose. Our end of the spiral arm remained to them, a sparse margin. Useful for quotas, not worthy of obsession. They monitored declared systems, registered fleets, treaty ports. Beyond those, hidden behind dust veils, rogue planets, dim K-class stars, and carefully falsified telemetry, humanity kept moving. We seeded shipyards inside comet swarms and under ice crusts. We built factories that disassembled themselves into innocent geology when scanned. We laced isolated systems with tight beam relays and quantum-synchronized timing webs the compact did not know we had solved. We bought legal fragments of elder technology, studied them, then took them apart down to first principles and built better versions in black sites no outsider had seen. Their drives were robust but conservative, optimized for control and reliability over speed. We broke that balance. Their command nets assumed slower adaptation cycles. Ours learned while fighting in simulation. Their fleets were concentrated symbols of terror. We preferred distributed kill webs, autonomous logistics, and manufacturing that could migrate. Outwardly, we remained careful. Inwardly, we sharpened. And while we prepared, the galaxy taught us what patience was for. The first outrage was small enough, by galactic standards, to be considered routine. A human salvage convoy in the Nareth drifts picked up emergency signals from a Silith nursery cluster. Thousands of translucent juvenile bodies trapped in a failing magnetic shelter after a mining collapse. The Silith were a minor-bound species, radially symmetric reef builders who lived in communal current patterns and encoded ancestry in mineral growth. They had no military standing and no right, under compact law, to request emergency transit priority through a Vor-controlled extraction lane. Our convoy diverted anyway. The Vor patrol arrived first. They ordered the humans to stand off. The rescue zone, they said, interfered with scheduled mass haul operations. The convoy captain transmitted that sentients were dying. The Vor replied, with perfect legal clarity, that tributary losses within forecast tolerance did not justify disruption of strategic movement. They then drove their ore train through the lane. Wake turbulence tore the shelter apart. The nursery cluster vented into dark. When our captain protested on an open channel, the Vor patrol lead answered, "You mistake grief for jurisdiction." We filed every possible complaint. The compact court emitted a procedural denial 42 days later. Then came seizure. A human-settled world called Halcyon, in an interior region we held under temporary development lease, possessed an unusually rich belt of field-reactive heavy elements. The calxate choir declared those materials necessary for harmonic infrastructure maintenance and voided our claim. When the colonists refused evacuation until arbitration, calxate enforcers descended in silence. Their weapons did not explode or burn. They unraveled neural coherence. People dropped where they stood, conscious but unable to direct muscle or speech, while machine tendrils sorted them into transport racks. Halcyon was cleared in 6 days. 20,000 settlers were relocated to det habitats. The world itself was handed to choir extractors. Our embassy was informed that resistance had been minimal and therefore appreciated. We swallowed that too. Then humanity witnessed what the Elder Order did when something truly disobeyed. There was a young species called the Aenean. If a shape made of braided cilia and electroreceptive gel can be called a species. They inhabited warm gas giants in the middle reaches and had been bound for 4,000 years. Their allowed volume was small. Their reproduction had long ago been chemically regulated under compact supervision. Quietly, illegally, they began building hidden habitats in Moonshadow and teaching themselves forbidden fabrication methods. They were discovered. The punishment fleet included Vor line breakers, rune infestation carriers, and a calxate null chorus that blanked local communication into dead silence. Human observers were ordered to remain at a designated distance and watch. That was the point. Watch. We watched the orbital habitats cracked open one by one. We watched atmosphere harvesters turned into impactors against population domes. We watched Aenean refugee swarms try to dive into the storms of their home giant, while hunter drones traced bioluminescent movement and cut them apart. We intercepted one elder transmission meant for the whole system, translated badly but clearly enough. Expansion impulse corrected, population excess corrected, memory imposed. 300 million died in 11 hours. Afterward, a compact communique praised the measured nature of the action and reminded younger polities that assistance to non-compliant subjects constituted co-rebellion. Something changed in us then, not our anger. That had been growing since the nursery cluster. What changed was our estimate of the future. There could be no accommodation with a system that made spectacle of extermination. There could only be timing, so we timed. Years passed, then decades. Human traders became common in the inner lanes, and with them doctors, engineers, mediators, codewrights. We helped where we were permitted, and often where we were not. We built quiet friendships with species the compact considered too weak to matter. We learned whose tribute routes were brittle, whose fleets depended on single-source components, whose command traditions made adaptation slow, whose fear was stronger than loyalty. We studied how elder powers signaled deterrence, how long they took to redeploy, how far their monopolies really reached. We mapped resentment system by system. All the while, our hidden perimeter thickened. Foundries under frozen crusts became fleet wombs. Research habitats in interstellar dark solved propulsion geometries the compact still considered unstable theory. Civilian infrastructure was designed from the beginning for war conversion. Every habitat school taught history in two forms, the public abridgment and the private ledger. At last we judged that we no longer faced a choice between eventual extinction and premature war. We had built enough to survive the first blow, perhaps more. Not enough to conquer the elders outright, not yet. But enough that truth no longer had to wait forever, so humanity spoke. We did it in every forum the compact possessed. Human delegates appeared in law chambers, market conclaves, relay archives, treaty stations. We released documented histories of punitive sterilizations, enforced famines, technological strangulation, and exterminatory actions against younger species. We named the dead where records existed. We named the systems where records had been erased. We demanded binding sovereignty rights for emergent civilizations, protected humanitarian transit, an end to tribute extractions, an end to population controls imposed by elder force, and joint tribunals for crimes of suppression. We were calm, precise, relentless. The galaxy listened in disbelief. Some species listened in terror. No one had challenged the moral foundation of the order so openly in 10,000 years. The elders misunderstood everything. They saw our accusation and thought insolence. They saw our refusal to scream and thought fragility. They saw our legal language and assumed we still believed law restrained them. Their internal signals, which we later decrypted from captured nodes, treated humanity as an instructive problem, a fast-talking peripheral species intoxicated by its own ethics, useful to punish before imitation spread. The place they chose for punishment was Concordance, a human-administered habitat lattice in the inner galaxy. It was lawful, demilitarized, and crowded with civilians from many species. We had built it as a hospital and mediation hub beside a relay nexus, under formal diplomatic guarantees witnessed by 3 compact powers. That made it ideal. If they destroyed it openly, every younger civilization would understand that no agreement, no neutrality, no service, no appeal would save them. The attack began without declaration. Calxate null field smothered communication. Rune infiltrators seeded the station's environmental veins with corrosive machine fungi that ate through support ribs and data trunks simultaneously. Then Vor-heavy platforms came out of fold and fired gravitic shears through the central spindle. Concordance did not explode. It came apart slowly enough for panic to have time. I was not there, but I have watched the recordings more times than sleep would recommend. Corridors twisting into impossible angles. Atmosphere venting in silver sheets full of bodies. Surgical wards losing spin and becoming tumbling cages. Emergency broadcasts cut off mid-sentence. Children from 6 species clustered in a school ring, while a teacher kept reading from a story slate because there was nothing else she could do. When the final casualty estimates settled, 2,400,000 humans were dead. Nearly 1 million non-humans with them. The compact issued a statement 30 hours later. It described the destruction as regrettable, disciplined, and necessary to correct human destabilization. No further negotiation followed. Humanity went silent. That silence frightened the galaxy more than any speech ever had. Our merchant hulls vanished from the lanes. Human liaison offices locked their doors and emptied. Advisors departed bound systems overnight. Embassy nodes transmitted automated acknowledgments and nothing more. Aid stations shut down after distributing everything in storage. In mixed settlements, human communities sold what could not be moved, burned what should not be left, and boarded ships with no public destination. Across hundreds of systems in perfect quiet coordination, we withdrew every exposed piece of ourselves. Some celebrated. Compact media channels announced that the disruptive primates had at last recognized reality. Certain tributary governors denounced us as reckless meddlers, whose moral vanity had invited correction. Some younger species mourned us as brave fools. Then the outer edge lit up. It began as energy signatures where no signature should have been. Dead systems woke. Rogue objects previously catalogued as debris unfolded heat blooms larger than shipyards. Dust clouds parted around acceleration plumes. Relay silence broke under traffic densities no one had believed possible so far from the center. Humanity had stopped pretending. From hidden anchors beyond the declared border, fleets emerged in numbers the compact's models had never assigned to us. Not grand parade armadas built for intimidation, but layered forces in motion. Torch carriers, missile clouds, drone tenders, mobile foundries, repair swarms, command vessels wrapped in sensor ghosting, courier spikes moving on trajectories that rewrote response time. Habitats once logged as sparse frontier settlements opened armored petals and launched defense constellations by the thousands. Manufacturing tonnage surged so steeply that some elder analysts first assumed their instruments were malfunctioning. The compact punitive expedition, already inbound toward our outer territories, continued anyway. It consisted of 82 capital formations, enough to crush any compliant younger polity ever known. They expected frightened resistance, static defenses, perhaps some desperate local innovation. Instead, they entered a battle space they did not understand. Our drives were faster in real combat than their theory allowed. Our sensor fusion reached through jamming layers they relied upon. Our command architecture did not center on vulnerable flagships, but flowed through distributed cognition webs impossible to decapitate with one strike. We let their first spearheads commit deep, then shredded their logistics. Fuel tenders vanished. Munition carriers went blind and self-collided under spoofed guidance. Vor line breakers lunged toward phantom concentrations and found mine lattices printed hours earlier by autonomous forges riding in their own thermal shadow. When the main exchange came at Doro's reach, the compact line formed according to doctrines older than our species. Concentrated mass, mutual field reinforcement, terror through visible invulnerability. Human forces attacked that assumption itself. We split space with staggered vectors, appearing not where prediction favored, but where their command latency made adaptation slowest. Kinetic lances arrived with microfold timing offsets that defeated standard shielding harmonics. Swarms seeded their hulls with burrowing smart matter that mapped and ruptured organ clusters, coolant veins, command fibers. Our carriers vomited attack craft in numbers no elder fleet had imagined could be coordinated at that velocity. The punitive expedition did not break all at once. It came apart in layers of disbelief. By the time surviving compact commanders understood, they were facing not a contained provincial species, but a civilization that had spent generations studying how to kill them. The battle was already becoming pursuit. And that was only the beginning. Because power in the galaxy had never rested on fleets alone. It had rested on certainty. On the conviction, repeated for ages, that resistance was futile, rebellion local, punishment inevitable. We broke that certainty at Doro's reach, and the fracture ran faster than ships. Bound species rose in systems the elders had stripped bare for centuries. Tribute convoys were seized. Relay stations changed codes and refused compact traffic. Service populations sabotaged dockyards from within. Some elder client species stayed loyal out of fear, many did not. The Silith, who had not forgotten the nursery cluster, turned whole reef foundries over to our logistics core. Aenean survivors emerged from hidden storm habitats and guided human strike groups through gas giant bastions, once considered impassable. Even species that did not join us outright simply stood aside and let the old order bleed. Then our offensive moved inward. People later called it the release, and that was the right word. Not because we became savage, because we stopped holding back. Human fleets crossed into the central lanes with a speed that made borders meaningless. We did not burn worlds for warning. We did not make examples of civilians. We did something worse from the elders' perspective. We removed their means of rule. The Vor extraction palaces lost their orbital guns, then their convoy webs, then their breeding vaults for military castes. The calxate harmonic monopolies were shattered when we released open fabrication schematics for substitute field lattices across hundreds of systems at once. The rune infestation networks died screaming in encrypted machine bands as human hunter kernels tracked them through substrate, habitat by habitat, frame by frame, until no hidden host architecture remained safe. Whenever an elder world tried to rally surrounding territories with threats of collective punishment, our fleets arrived before the punishment could fall. Whenever they massed for counteroffensive, we hit production, navigation, and command in the same operational breath. Their doctrines prized hierarchy, age, ritual precedence, monopolized expertise. Ours prized adaptation, initiative, and the assumption that every plan would be wrong by first contact with reality. We had spent too long in the dark margins, solving hard problems with little margin for error to fight any other way. There were horrors still. The elders did not surrender cleanly. Cornered powers rarely do. Some attempted scorched space retreats. Some tried species-targeted plagues. One Vor brood command threatened to crack the mantle of a bound world unless relieved. We boarded them through the debris of their own escorts and ended the threat room by room. On another front, a calxate chorus tried to collapse a relay cluster full of refugees rather than lose it. Human marines and Silith engineers held the lattice together with emergency field braces while our strike craft cut the null projectors apart. Victory was not neat, it was expensive. But from that point onward, it was no longer in doubt. The last great elder coalition formed near the Galactic bulge, where ancient infrastructure and prestige still clung to them. They called on every species to defend civilization against human chaos. Fewer answered than they expected. Some sent token forces, many sent nothing. Several openly joined us in the final push. I was on the command deck of the vessel Resolute then, watching the tactical bloom spread across the display like a second galaxy made of intent. Human groups on the left arc. Aenean stormriders screening beneath gas debris. Captured compact relays turned to our timing net. Silith lattice ships extending shield reefs around liberated civilian corridors. Across from us, the remnants of the powers that had ruled by fear for ages. I remember thinking how small they looked once the myth was gone. The battle lasted 19 hours. The coalition line failed in 4. The rest was encirclement, disarmament, boarding, collapse. When the final Vor command spindle surrendered, it did so not to us alone, but to a joint channel carrying the signatures of 23 formerly bound civilizations. That mattered. We made sure it mattered. After the war, there were voices among humans calling for vengeance without limit. No one who saw Concordance burn was untouched by that desire. But rage is not the same thing as purpose, and purpose had carried us this far. So we did not build a new compact with ourselves at the center. We dismantled tribute systems. We opened strategic technologies under distributed safeguards, so no single civilization could monopolize them again. We imposed armament transparency on everyone, including ourselves. Elder species that had practiced civilizational containment were themselves contained, disarmed, restricted, monitored by multi-species accords, denied the ability to project annihilating force beyond their home volumes. War crimes tribunals were not perfect, but they existed, and for the first time in galactic memory, power was forced to answer to something outside itself. The bound territories were not suddenly healed. Some scars would last longer than stars. Whole peoples had to relearn choices they had been denied for millennia. Some hated us. Some loved us too much. Most sensibly distrusted all saviors. Good they should. A free order is not built by asking anyone to be grateful. It is built by making sure no one can put a boot on the throat of the galaxy again. Years later, when traffic returned to the once feared central lanes, I visited the ruins of Concordance. The core spindle was gone. Memorial habitats now orbited the debris field, grown by many species together. In the largest chamber, names flowed in light across a dark wall. Humans, Silith, Aenean, dozens more. The dead of an atrocity meant as a lesson. It had been a lesson, just not the one the elders intended. We came from the edge of the galaxy, from cold distances the old powers considered marginal. They thought remoteness meant weakness, loneliness meant irrelevance, and lateness meant inferiority. They did not understand what isolation had made of us. We had learned to endure without witness, to build without permission, to hide when hiding was wise, and to remember every debt. In the end, the stars they ignored were the stars that broke them. And in the long outer dark, where humanity had once grown unnoticed, new lanes now shone in every direction, open to all.